The Dom Perignon champagne cost more than my Brooklyn rent, but I pretended it was just another Tuesday night as I watched Manhattan's power players peacock around the plaza's ballroom. My mission was simple: infiltrate, gather intel on Blackstone Enterprises' next moves, and slip out undetected. What I didn't expect was to literally crash into New York's most arrogant and infuriatingly attractive CEO. "Sorry, I started, frantically dabbing champagne from the lapel of the man's pristine tuxedo. "Jesus Christ, you're perfect," he said, and for a split second my heart did a little somersault before my brain caught up with the context. His emerald eyes scanned me from head to toe, not predatorily, but like I was the solution to a very specific problem. "Excuse me?" I stepped back, raising an eyebrow. The man was absurdly handsome. Dark hair slightly mussed, jawline that could cut glass, and that brand of confidence that only comes with an 8-figure bank account. Definitely not someone I should be noticing like this, especially considering I was technically spying on his tax bracket. "You have to help me," he whispered urgently, leaning closer. His cologne, something expensive and woody, made my stomach flip. "See that blonde in the red dress by the orchestra?" I glanced over his shoulder and spotted a stunning woman approaching with the determination of a heat-seeking missile, eyes locked on the man in front of me. "The one who looks like she's about to devour your soul?" "That's the one. She's my ex-fiancée, Victoria Ashworth, and she's been stalking me for 6 months since I called off our engagement. I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend. Just for tonight, I promise." I blinked, processing the surreal situation. "You just asked a complete stranger to fake date you to escape your ex?" "Technically, we're not strangers anymore. You spilled champagne on me. That creates a bond." He smiled, and damn, that smile should come with a warning label. "And I pay well for emergency services." How well? The question escaped before I could censor myself. "Look, a girl has bills, and my junior analyst salary at Green Tech Solutions barely covered the basics of living in New York. $5,000. I nearly choked on my own champagne. For one night? For 3 months. The world stopped for a beat. $5,000 for 3 months of fake dating a millionaire? That would solve my money problems and leave enough to start the emergency fund my mother always begged me to create. "What's your name?" I asked, because apparently I was seriously considering this. "Alexander Blackstone." He extended his hand, and I felt my blood freeze. Blackstone, as in Blackstone Enterprises, as in the company trying to buy and destroy Green Tech, where I worked, as in the billionaire CEO my boss David Chen mentioned with the kind of hatred usually reserved for dictators and people who don't use turn signals. I was face to face with the enemy. "And you are?" Alexander was still holding my hand, and I realized I'd been staring at him too long. "Sarah," I said quickly. "Sarah Thompson." I lied about the last name instinctively, my natural caution kicking into protection mode. "Sarah Thompson," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "Do you accept?" Victoria was about 30 feet away now, navigating the crowd with surgical precision. I could see the exact moment she spotted us. Her eyes narrowed, and her posture became even more predatory. "She looks psychotic," I muttered. "You have no idea. She once hired a private investigator to find out where I had lunch just so she could accidentally run into me every day for 2 weeks. Jesus Christ. So? Do you save me, or do I have to consider witness protection and plastic surgery?" I looked at Victoria, now 20 feet away and closing fast. I looked at Alexander, with his pleading green eyes and his ridiculously generous offer. I thought about my boss, who would probably have an aneurysm if he knew where I was right now, let alone that I was considering a fake relationship with the man he considered corporate antichrist. "What kind of girlfriend do you need me to be?" I asked. "The kind who's madly in love with me and isn't afraid to show it in public." "For 3 months?" 3 months, social events, some dinners, maybe a weekend or 2 in the Hamptons. Nothing too invasive. Victoria was 15 feet away. And after 3 months, we break up amicably. You go on with your life $5,000 richer. I go on with mine stalker-free. 10 feet. Alexei. Victoria's voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I did the only rational thing a desperately broke and impulsive woman could do. I grabbed Alexander by the lapels and kissed him. The kiss was meant to be just for show, a convincing performance to drive Victoria away. But the moment our lips met, something unexpected happened. He tasted like expensive champagne and dangerous possibilities, and when his hand found my waist, pulling me closer, I completely forgot this was supposed to be theater. When we broke apart, we were both breathless. His eyes had darkened, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "Wow," he murmured, and I couldn't tell if it was part of the performance or not. "Alexander Blackstone!" Victoria's voice cut through the air like a siren. We separated, and I turned to face the woman who had apparently inspired this bizarre arrangement. Up close, Victoria was even more intimidating. Platinum blonde, flawless makeup, dress that probably cost more than my car, and the kind of posture that screamed old American aristocracy. "Victoria," Alexander said, his voice smoothly polite but with an underlying tension. His arm remained around my waist, and I tried to look like I belonged there. "What a surprise seeing you here." "Don't play games with me, Alex. Who is she?" Victoria looked at me like I was something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. "This is Sarah, my girlfriend." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost believed it myself. "Sarah, this is Victoria, an acquaintance." "Acquaintance?" Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "We were engaged for 2 years, Alexander." "Yes, well, that was before I met Sarah." Alexander pulled me slightly closer, and I tried to ignore how my body reacted to his warmth. "Wasn't it, darling?" "Shit. Showtime." "Yes," I said, trying to sound natural. "It was love at first sight." I smiled up at Alexander, and he returned a look so intense, I almost forgot we were lying. Victoria studied us with hawk eyes, clearly looking for cracks in our performance. "And how long have you two been together?" 6 months, Alexander answered without hesitation. 4 months, I said at the same time. Dead silence. "Well," Victoria smiled like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "How interesting. You can't even remember how long you've been in love." My mind raced frantically. "Actually, we're counting from different milestones," I said quickly. "Alexander counts from our first date. I count from when we made it official. He's more romantic than I am." I shrugged like this was perfectly normal, when actually my heart was beating like I'd run a marathon. Alexander looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "Sarah's always been more practical about these things." Victoria clearly wasn't convinced, but before she could continue her interrogation, a middle-aged man approached. "Alexander, I've been looking for you." The man clapped Alexander on the shoulder. "We need to discuss the Roosevelt project before the night's over." "Of course, Charles." Alexander turned to me. "Do you mind, darling? It'll just be a few minutes." I was about to say yes when Victoria interjected. "Oh, how perfect. Sarah and I can get to know each other while you boys talk business." Her smile was pure malice. Alexander looked genuinely alarmed. "Actually, maybe Sarah should come with us." "Don't be silly," Victoria said, already grabbing my arm with surprising strength for someone so elegant. "Women need to chat among themselves. I have so many questions about how you two met." Alexander shot me a look of apology and panic before being dragged away by Charles. And so, less than 10 minutes after agreeing to fake date a billionaire to ward off his obsessive ex, I found myself face to face with said ex, with no backup and a story full of holes to defend. Victoria guided me to the bar with the efficiency of a general moving troops. "So, Sarah," she said, ordering 2 martinis from the bartender, "tell me about yourself. What do you do for a living?" "I work in tech," I answered vaguely, accepting the martini she offered even though I probably shouldn't drink anymore. "What kind of tech?" "Sustainable. Green solutions." Technically, not a lie. "Oh, how noble." Victoria took a delicate sip of her martini. And where did you two meet? Alexander never mentioned any Sarah. Shit. I needed a convincing story. Fast. At a coffee shop, I said. I was reading. He was on his laptop. We bumped into each other getting coffee. Generic enough to be plausible, specific enough not to sound completely made up. How romantic. And what book were you reading? Double shit. Why was she interrogating me like the FBI? The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I said, because it was the last book I'd finished. Ah, a classic. Victoria seemed almost disappointed I had an answer. And you live where? Brooklyn. Truth was easier than lies. Of course you do. Her tone suggested Brooklyn was where people like me naturally belonged, far from Manhattan and Alexander's real life. We continued this verbal sparring match for another 15 minutes, Victoria asking seemingly casual questions but clearly trying to catch me in some inconsistency. Me improvising answers and trying to act like being interrogated by a psychotic socialite was perfectly normal for me on a Tuesday night. Finally, Alexander returned, looking relieved to find us both still in one piece. Sorry about that, he said, pulling me close again. How are you two getting along? Wonderfully, Victoria lied with a smile that could cut steel. Sarah is fascinating, especially her stories about how you two met. Alexander shot me a questioning look, and I tried to telepathically convey that we had a problem. Well, we should get going, Alexander said diplomatically. Sarah has work early tomorrow. Oh, what a shame. Victoria clearly didn't think it was a shame at all. Well, I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. After all, Alex and I have been moving in the same circles for years. The threat couldn't have been clearer if she'd held up a sign. Alexander and I said our polite goodbyes and walked toward the exit, his hand still on my lower back. It wasn't until we were in the elevator, descending to the lobby, that the full reality of the situation hit me. So, I said, watching the numbers decrease. That was interesting. Did she give you a hard time? Alexander looked genuinely concerned. Nothing I can't handle. But Alexander? I turned to face him. If we're doing this for the next 3 months, we need rules, and a story that adds up. I completely agree. The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft ding. Dinner tomorrow? We can hash out the details. Dinner works. We stepped out into the plaza's marble lobby, and I felt like Cinderella at the first signs of midnight. But I picked the place, somewhere in Brooklyn where Victoria Ashworth would never set foot. Alexander laughed, a genuine, surprisingly warm sound. Brooklyn works for me. Just one question. What? What do you actually do for a living? Because sustainable tech was convincing for Victoria, but something tells me there's more to the story. I paused at the revolving door, considering how much truth I could reveal without completely blowing up this already insane situation. I work for a company that's trying to save the world, I said finally. And you work for a company that's trying to buy it. Alexander frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said, pushing through the door and stepping out into the cold Manhattan night, tomorrow's going to be a very interesting dinner. I left Alexander standing in the middle of the plaza lobby, probably wondering what he'd gotten himself into. If he knew he'd just hired his rival company's employee to be his fake girlfriend, he'd probably run for the hills. But $5,000 was $5,000. And if I was being honest with myself, which was rarely a good idea, the chemistry between us had been unexpectedly real. 3 months of fake dating Alexander Blackstone. What could go wrong? Everything, whispered my rational conscience as I walked toward the subway. Exactly, agreed the impulsive part of me that had just accepted the craziest deal of my life. 3 months to maintain the most elaborate lie I'd ever created. Keep Victoria from discovering the truth. Hide my real identity from Alexander, and pray my boss never found out I was literally sleeping with the enemy. Figuratively sleeping. Probably. Shit. I should have known Alexander Blackstone would show up to our casual Brooklyn dinner in a Tesla that cost more than most people's houses. What I didn't expect was for him to parallel park it with the skill of a native New Yorker, or for him to emerge from the driver's seat wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket that somehow made him look even more dangerous than the tuxedo had. "You actually came," I said, leaning against the brick wall outside Lucinda's, a hole-in-the-wall Italian place in Red Hook that had been my sanctuary since moving to the city 3 years ago. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Alexander locked the Tesla with a soft beep that seemed almost apologetic in this neighborhood of old warehouses and corner bodegas. "I thought you might send a driver, or change your mind entirely once you sobered up from last night's insanity." He laughed, running a hand through his hair. In daylight, well, evening light, since we'd agreed to meet at 7, he looked younger somehow, less intimidating billionaire CEO, more like a guy who might actually know how to have fun. To be fair, I considered both options. Then I remembered Victoria's face when she saw us kiss. That kiss. I'd been trying not to think about it all day, which was like trying not to think about a Category 5 hurricane while standing in its path. "About that," I said, pushing off the wall and heading toward the restaurant's door. "We need to establish some ground rules if we're going to pull this off." "Agreed. But first," he caught my arm gently, and I felt that same electric shock from the night before. "Can I just say this place smells incredible?" He was right. The scent of garlic, basil, and something indefinably comforting wafted from Lucinda's open door, mixing with the salt air from the harbor. It was about as far from Manhattan's sterile sophistication as you could get without leaving the city. "Wait until you taste Nona's ragu," I said, leading him inside. "She's been perfecting it for 60 years. The restaurant was exactly what I'd hoped, busy enough that we wouldn't stand out, intimate enough that we could talk without shouting. Mismatched tables, wine bottles as candle holders, and the kind of warmth that only came from 3 generations of family recipes and genuine hospitality. "Sarah!" Nonna Lucinda appeared as if summoned, her gray hair pinned up in a bun that defied gravity and several decades of kitchen steam. She was barely 5 feet tall but commanded the room like a general. "You bring us a new friend." "Nonna, this is Alexander. Alexander, this is the most dangerous woman in Brooklyn. She'll feed you until you can't move, then guilt you into coming back next week." Alexander extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Bah, just Nonna. You call me Nonna." She waved away his formality, then studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd been sizing up people for 7 decades. "You treat our Sarah good, yes? She's special, this one." I felt heat creep up my neck. Nonna had adopted me as honorary family the first week I'd discovered this place, back when I was surviving on ramen and optimism. She didn't know this was all fake, and something about that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. "I can see that," Alexander said, and the sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. "She's pretty remarkable." Nonna beamed and bustled away to seat us at a corner table draped with a red checkered tablecloth that had probably seen 1,000 first dates. Real first dates with real couples who weren't lying about everything. "So," Alexander said once we'd settled in with a bottle of Chianti that Nonna had insisted on, "young love needs wine, trust me. Ground rules." "Right." I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. "First rule. We need a consistent backstory. How we met, when, where we had our first date. All of it has to be bulletproof, because Victoria is clearly going to fact-check everything. Coffee shop 4 months ago, you were reading, what was it? The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I was working on a presentation, spilled coffee on your book when I got up to leave." I looked up from my phone, surprised. "You were paying attention." "I have to pay attention. My company's survival often depends on remembering details." He paused, swirling his wine. "What does your company do exactly? I know you said sustainable tech, but..." Here it was. Decision time. I could keep lying, dig the hole deeper, or I could give him just enough truth to feel less guilty about the massive deception I was perpetrating. "We develop technology to help companies reduce their carbon footprint," I said carefully. Energy optimization, waste reduction, that kind of thing. All true, technically. I just left out the part where his company was actively trying to acquire us so they could bury our patents and continue polluting with impunity. That's actually fascinating. The clean energy sector is exploding right now. There's so much potential for innovation. His eyes lit up with genuine interest, and I felt another uncomfortable twist in my stomach. What's your background? Engineering? Computer science? Environmental science, actually, with a focus on industrial applications. I fell into the tech side by accident. Also true. My original plan had been to work for the EPA, save the world through policy and regulation. Then I'd met David Chen at a conference, learned about the work green tech was doing, and realized I could have more impact in the private sector. What about you? Always destined for the corporate throne? Alexander laughed, but there was something rueful in it. Hardly. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. Spent every summer at my grandmother's house on Cape Cod, diving and cataloging sea life. The image of a young Alexander Blackstone with a snorkel and flippers was so incongruous with the billionaire CEO sitting across from me that I nearly choked on my wine. What happened? My father died when I was 16. Heart attack at 52. His voice went quiet, and I saw a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. Someone had to take over the family business eventually, and my older brother made it clear he had zero interest. So I changed my major from marine biology to business, spent every school break learning the company inside and out. That must have been hard. I meant it. Whatever I thought about Blackstone Enterprises and their environmental practices, losing a parent that young and having your entire life trajectory change overnight was genuinely awful. It was. Still is sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I'm good at what I do and the company's thriving. But I sometimes wonder what would have happened if... He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself back to the present. Sorry, I don't usually share the family drama on first fake dates. It's okay. For what it's worth, I think you would have made an excellent marine biologist. You have the attention to detail for it. Before he could respond, Nonna appeared with enough food to feed a small army, antipasto, fresh bread, and 2 enormous plates of her famous ragu that smelled like pure comfort. "You eat," she commanded. "Young people today, always talking, never eating. Love needs fuel." As she bustled away again, Alexander and I looked at each other across the table loaded with more food than 2 people could reasonably consume. "She's not wrong about needing fuel," I said, twirling pasta around my fork. "This fake relationship is going to require energy." "About that, what exactly do you expect from me over the next 3 months? I mean, I know the basics. Social events, keeping Victoria at bay, looking convincingly smitten. But what about the day-to-day stuff? I'd been thinking about this all day. We need to be seen together regularly, but not so much that it interferes with our real lives. Maybe dinner once a week, plus any events where Victoria might show up. That seems reasonable. What about social media? Victoria definitely stalks my Instagram. I nearly choked on my ragu. You want to fake a relationship on social media too? Don't sound so horrified. It's just photos, couples dinners, maybe a weekend trip to the Hamptons, nothing too personal. The idea of fake dating photos on Instagram made this whole arrangement feel suddenly more real and more surreal at the same time. Fine, but I get approval on any photos before they go up, and we need to discuss physical boundaries. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Physical boundaries? I could feel my cheeks burning. You know, hand-holding, casual touches, kissing. What's okay? What's off limits? How we signal each other if something's too much. Kissing seemed to work pretty well last night, he said, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach flip. That was a heat-of-the-moment thing. We need to be more strategic about it going forward. Strategic kissing. Got it. He was definitely laughing at me now. Anything else? Yes, actually. The most important rule. I leaned forward, lowering my voice even though Nonna was safely across the restaurant arguing with someone about proper wine pairings. No matter what happens, no matter how convincing this gets, we both remember that it's fake. 3 months, $5,000, clean break. No one catches feelings. No one gets hurt. Alexander nodded slowly, but something flickered across his face too quickly for me to interpret. No catching feelings. Rule number 1.
Rule number 1, I agreed, trying to ignore the fact that just saying it out loud made me feel like I was lying. We spent the next hour hammering out the details of our fake relationship over Nonna's incredible food and entirely too much wine. Favorite restaurants, pet peeves, family dynamics, all the little details that couples would know about each other. Alexander was surprisingly easy to talk to once the billionaire facade dropped.
He was funny, self-deprecating about his privileged upbringing, and passionate about environmental conservation in a way that would have shocked my boss. "Wait," I said as we split a piece of tiramisu that probably contained enough alcohol to qualify as a cocktail. "You personally funded a coral reef restoration project in the Caribbean?" 3 of them, actually. And before you ask, yes, it's partly guilt money. Blackstone Enterprises hasn't always been as environmentally conscious as we could be. The understatement of the century, but I kept that thought to myself. That's still more than most people do. My grandmother would have disowned me if I didn't at least try to give back. She was an environmental activist before it was fashionable, protesting oil spills in the 70s, lobbying for clean water legislation. She's the one who taught me to love the ocean in the first place. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this Alexander, who funded reef restoration and spoke passionately about his environmentalist grandmother, with the CEO whose company was actively trying to destroy mine. Either he was the world's most convincing actor, or there was a lot more complexity to this situation than I'd realized. "She sounds amazing," I said finally. She was. Died 2 years ago at 93, still fighting for environmental causes until the end. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "She would have liked you, I think. Anyone fighting to save the world was automatically on her good side." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Here he was, sharing genuine memories of someone he'd loved, and I was sitting across from him planning to deceive him for 3 months. Worse, I was starting to like him. Really like him. Not just find him attractive. He was nothing like the corporate villain I'd imagined. "Alexander," I started, then stopped. I couldn't tell him the truth without blowing up everything, but I couldn't keep sitting here feeling like a complete fraud either. "Everything okay?" He reached across the table and touched my hand, just a light brush of fingers that sent electricity shooting up my arm. "Yeah, this is all pretty surreal, you know? Yesterday I was a broke analyst trying to make rent. Today I'm fake dating a billionaire to fool his psychotic ex." "When you put it like that, it does sound insane." He didn't move his hand away. "Any regrets?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The sharp intelligence in his green eyes, the way he'd been genuinely interested in my work, the vulnerability he'd shown when talking about his father and grandmother, the way he'd treated Nonna with respect and warmth, how he'd parallel parked in Brooklyn without complaint. "Ask me again in 3 months," I said. After dinner, Alexander insisted on walking me to the subway station despite my protests that he didn't need to venture further into authentic Brooklyn than necessary. "You know," he said as we strolled past bodegas and late-night laundromats, "this might be the first time I've walked anywhere in the city without a destination in mind." "Manhattan doesn't count as the city," I said automatically. "This is the city. Manhattan is just where people go to make money and eat overpriced salads." Noted. "So what else should I know about the real city if I'm going to be dating a Brooklyn girl?" "Well, first rule of Brooklyn, never call it hipster or trendy. Those are fighting words. Second rule, bodega cats are sacred and must be respected. Third rule, knowing the difference between good pizza and tourist pizza is a matter of survival." I feel like I need to take notes. "Don't worry, you'll pick it up. Just remember, if you ever suggest going to Times Square for any reason, I'm breaking up with you on the spot." "Even fake breaking up?" "Especially fake breaking up. Some things are unforgivable." We'd reached the subway entrance, that inevitable end-of-evening moment where we had to figure out what came next. The wine and Nonna's warmth had created a bubble of intimacy that felt dangerously real. "So," Alexander said, hands in his jacket pockets, "when do I see my fake girlfriend again?" "There's a charity gala on Friday, Environmental Innovation for the Future, or something equally worthy. Victoria will definitely be there. It's exactly the kind of event where she'd expect to see you with a date." "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7? Actually, maybe we should meet there. I don't need you seeing my apartment until we're at least a month into this fake relationship. A girl has to maintain some mystery." He laughed. "Fair enough. Friday at 7, wherever this gala is. The Natural History Museum, very on brand for the environmental theme. I'll see you there." He leaned down and kissed my cheek, a soft brush of lips that felt entirely too natural. "Thanks for tonight, Sarah. I had a good time." "Yeah," I said, touching my cheek where his lips had been. "Me too." I watched him walk back toward his Tesla, then disappeared down into the subway tunnel before I could do something stupid like invite him up for coffee or confess that every instinct I had was screaming that this fake relationship was about to become very, very real. As the Q train carried me home to my tiny apartment, I scrolled through my phone and found Alexander's Instagram. His most recent post was from that morning, a photo of the sunrise over Manhattan with the caption, "New day, new possibilities." Before I could lose my nerve, I liked the photo. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Alexander had liked my most recent post, a picture of my coffee and a book from last weekend. It was such a small thing, barely worth noticing. But as I stared at the little heart next to his username, I realized I was in much bigger trouble than I'd thought. Rule number 1, no catching feelings. I was pretty sure I'd already broken it. The American Museum of Natural History after hours was like stepping into a fever dream, where dinosaurs wore bow ties and extinct species mingled with Manhattan's most powerful environmentalists. I stood beneath the towering skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, nursing a glass of organic champagne and trying to convince myself that the flutter in my stomach was just pre-mission nerves, not anticipation of seeing Alexander again. Sarah Thompson. I turned to find Marcus Rivera, GreenTech's head of marketing, looking as shocked as if he'd discovered me selling state secrets to foreign governments. Which, considering I was about to spend the evening on the arm of our biggest corporate enemy, wasn't that far off. "Marcus, hi." I hoped my voice sounded more casual than panicked. "Fancy seeing you here." "David's got us all working the room tonight. Potential investors. You know how it is." Marcus glanced around the crowd of perfectly dressed philanthropists. "But what are you doing here? This isn't exactly junior analyst territory." Shit. I hadn't considered that my own colleagues might be at this thing. Of course, GreenTech would be here. It was exactly the kind of event where David would want us schmoozing potential clients and investors. "I'm here with someone," I said vaguely, scanning the crowd for any sign of Alexander. Where was he? It was already 7:15. "Anyone I know?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. In the 3 years I'd worked at GreenTech, I'd never brought a date to a company function. Mostly because I'd never dated anyone who could afford the ticket price. Probably not. "He's not really in our..." "Sarah." Alexander's voice behind me sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I turned to find him in a midnight blue suit that probably cost more than my car, looking like he'd stepped off the cover of GQ. But it was the way his face lit up when he saw me that made my heart skip. "Alexander, hi." I stood on my tiptoes to kiss his cheek, hyper-aware of Marcus watching our every interaction. "You look incredible." "Not as incredible as you," he said, and the warmth in his voice sounded genuine enough that I almost forgot we were acting. His eyes swept over my black cocktail dress, a splurge from last year that I'd been saving for special occasions. "That dress is stunning." "Thanks, Alexander Blackstone." Marcus's voice had gone flat, professional, the tone he used when discussing quarterly projections or budget cuts. I felt Alexander tense beside me. "Marcus Rivera, GreenTech Solutions." Marcus extended his hand with the enthusiasm of someone shaking hands with a cobra. We've met before. Right, the Renewable Energy Conference in Boston last year. Alexander shook Marcus's hand politely, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. How's the vertical farming initiative coming along? The fact that Alexander knew about green tech's projects sent ice through my veins. Of course he knew. He was probably tracking our every move, looking for weaknesses he could exploit when Blackstone made their acquisition bid. It's progressing well, Marcus said carefully. Though I'm surprised you're interested, given Blackstone's different approach to environmental issues. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a fossil. I needed to defuse this before Marcus started asking questions I couldn't answer. Marcus, Alexander is I stumbled over the word, suddenly feeling the weight of the lie. My boyfriend. Marcus's expression went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds, landing somewhere between shock and horror. Your boyfriend, Alexander Blackstone, the CEO of Blackstone Enterprises. Yes, I said, lifting my chin defiantly even though I felt like I might throw up. Is that a problem? No problem at all, Marcus said, but his voice suggested it was actually a very big problem. Just unexpected. David will be interested to hear about this. My boss. David would definitely be interested to hear that one of his employees was dating the man trying to destroy our company. Interested in the way that typically ended with unemployment and very bad references. There's nothing inappropriate about who I date in my personal time, I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Of course not, Marcus agreed, but his smile was strained. Well, I should get back to networking. Enjoy your evening. As soon as Marcus disappeared into the crowd, Alexander turned to me with concern written all over his face. That seemed tense. Everything okay? Fine, I lied. Just office politics. You know how it is. Actually, I don't think I do. He looked at me like I'd personally kicked his dog. Alexander studied my face. Sarah, is there something you're not telling me about your company? Before I could answer, a familiar laugh cut through the ambient noise of the gala like nails on a chalkboard. Victoria Ashworth glided toward us in a silver dress that probably cost more than my annual salary, flanked by 2 women who looked like they'd stepped out of the social pages of Vogue. Well, Victoria purred, air-kissing Alexander's cheeks with the familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Alex, darling, and Sarah, of course. How lovely to see you again. Victoria. Alexander's arm slipped around my waist protectively. You remember Sarah? How could I forget? Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. You know, I realized I never got your last name, Sarah. Fuck. I'd hoped she'd forgotten that detail in the chaos of the plaza encounter. Thompson, I said smoothly. Sarah Thompson. Thompson, Victoria repeated, like she was testing the name for authenticity. And you work in sustainable technology, right? For which company? Green Tech Solutions, I answered, because lying about something she could easily verify seemed pointless. Victoria's eyes lit up with malicious delight. Green Tech? How fascinating. The same Green Tech that's been quite vocal about their opposition to certain development projects. Alexander's hand tightened slightly on my waist. Opposition to what projects? Oh, you didn't know. Victoria looked between us with fake innocence that fooled absolutely no one. Green Tech has been one of the most vocal critics of Blackstone's expansion into renewable energy sectors. There was that rather scathing op-ed in the Times last month. What was the headline? Something about greenwashing and corporate environmental theater, I believe. The blood drained from my face. That op-ed had been David's baby, a passionate piece about how large corporations were buying up innovative green tech companies only to bury their patents and maintain the status quo. It had specifically called out Blackstone Enterprises as a prime example of environmental hypocrisy. Alexander was staring at me now, and I could see the pieces clicking into place behind his eyes. That's interesting, he said slowly. I remember that piece. Very well researched. Very passionate. Isn't it wonderful when couples can have such spirited professional debates? Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness. I imagine your dinner conversations must be fascinating. They certainly are, Alexander said, his voice carefully neutral. But when I looked up at him, his expression was unreadable. Well, we should let you two get back to your evening, Victoria continued. I'm sure you have so much to discuss. Oh, and Sarah, that dress is lovely. Very affordable. She glided away with her entourage, leaving me standing in the shadow of a triceratops skeleton, feeling like I'd just been hit by a meteor. So, Alexander said after a long moment, Green Tech Solutions. Alexander, I can explain. Can you? Because right now I'm trying to figure out if my fake girlfriend works for a company that considers me an environmental war criminal, or if this is all just an incredible coincidence. The hurt in his voice was worse than anger would have been. I'd been prepared for anger. Hurt was harder to defend against. It's complicated, I said weakly. I'm sure it is. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly tired. Let's take a walk, away from the crowd.
He led me through the museum's corridors, past displays of minerals and meteorites, until we found ourselves in the Hall of Ocean Life. The massive blue whale model suspended from the ceiling cast everything in an ethereal glow, and the relative quiet was a relief after the chaos of the gala. Talk, Alexander said simply. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how much truth I could afford to tell him without completely destroying everything. Yes, I work for Green Tech.
Yes, we've been critical of some of Blackstone's practices, but that doesn't change anything about our arrangement. Doesn't it? You've been lying to me from the beginning. I never lied about working in sustainable tech. You conveniently left out the part where your company considers mine the enemy. Alexander leaned against the railing, studying the whale above us. Is this part of some elaborate corporate espionage scheme? Get close to the CEO, gather intelligence? The accusation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been planning when I first went to the plaza? Gather information, report back to David, help Green Tech stay one step ahead of Blackstone's acquisition attempts? No, I said firmly. The fake dating thing was your idea, remember? I was just trying to survive a conversation with your psychotic ex. But you didn't exactly rush to correct my assumptions about your work, did you? He was right, and we both knew it. I'd let him believe I worked for some generic green tech company, not the specific one that had been a thorn in Blackstone's side for months. You want the truth? I turned to face him fully. Fine. Yes, I work for Green Tech. Yes, my boss thinks you're corporate Satan. Yes, I probably should have told you that from the beginning. But you know what? I don't care. Alexander raised an eyebrow. You don't care? About the corporate politics? About whatever beef exists between our companies? No, I don't care. Because this, I gestured between us, has nothing to do with that. This is about $5,000 and keeping Victoria from stalking you for the next 3 months. Everything else is just noise. Is it? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Because the truth was, everything had changed since that dinner at Nona's. The man standing in front of me wasn't the corporate villain I'd expected. He was complex, thoughtful, carrying his own burdens and contradictions. He funded coral reef restoration while running a company that destroyed environments. He'd given up marine biology for family duty. He treated Brooklyn grandmothers with respect and knew more about renewable energy than he probably should. Sarah. His voice was softer now. What are we doing here? I don't know, I admitted. 3 days ago, I thought I knew exactly who you were. Then you started talking about your grandmother and marine biology, and now I don't know anything anymore. I could say the same thing about you. He stepped closer, and I could smell that expensive cologne that had been driving me crazy all week. You're supposed to be a simple fake girlfriend. Instead, you're this brilliant, passionate woman who fights for causes she believes in and makes me want to be a better person than I probably am. Alexander, I know this is supposed to be fake. I know we have rules. But I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest. Okay. When we kissed the other night, both times, how much of that was acting? The question hit me like a physical blow. Because the truth was, none of it had been acting. Not the kiss at the plaza. Not the moment on my cheek outside the subway. Not the way my heart was racing right now as he looked at me like I was something precious and complicated and worth figuring out. Alexander, we can't. That's not what I asked. Around us, the museum was quiet except for the distant sounds of the gala. We were alone under the blue whale, surrounded by the history of extinct species and evolutionary adaptation, and I realized we were at our own evolutionary moment. We could stick to the plan, maintain the fiction, keep everything safe and simple. Or we could acknowledge that whatever was happening between us had moved far beyond the boundaries of our fake relationship. None of it, I whispered. None of it was acting. The confession hung between us like a bridge we couldn't uncross. Alexander's eyes darkened and he took another step closer. Then we have a problem, he said. A big problem. Because I'm supposed to be paying you to pretend to care about me, and instead I'm falling for someone who might actually hate everything I represent. I don't hate you, I said quickly. I should, but I don't. That's the problem. Before either of us could think better of it, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me. Not for show, not for Victoria, not for anyone but us. It was soft and desperate, and full of all the things we weren't supposed to be feeling. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. This is insane, I said. Completely insane. We're supposed to be fake dating. We're doing a terrible job of keeping it fake. The worst job. Neither of us moved away. If anything, I leaned closer, my hands fisting in the lapels of his perfect suit. What do we do now? I asked. I have no idea, but I know I don't want to go back to pretending this is just business. Even though I work for your corporate enemy? Even though you work for my corporate enemy? He smiled ruefully. My grandmother would have said that makes you perfect for me. Someone to keep me honest. And what about Victoria? She's already suspicious, and after tonight she's definitely going to dig deeper. Let her dig. She'll find exactly what she found tonight, that Sarah Thompson works for Green Tech and is somehow involved with me despite all the reasons that should be impossible. Alexander, I know this is complicated. I know we're from different worlds, and our companies are probably going to end up in legal battles, and there are a million reasons this is a terrible idea. But I also know that I haven't felt this connected to someone in years, maybe ever. So if you're willing to figure this out as we go, I'm in. I looked up at him. This impossibly complicated man who had just offered to navigate the most precarious situation I'd ever found myself in. Everything logical told me to walk away, maintain the original arrangement, keep my heart safely out of the equation. Instead, I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him again. I'm in too, I said against his lips, but we need new rules. Such as? No more lies. About our work, our companies, anything important. If we're doing this for real, we do it honestly. Agreed. What else? We figure out how to handle the corporate stuff as it comes up. Neither of us compromises our professional ethics, but we don't let our company's problems become our problems. That might be easier said than done. Probably, but we try. Anything else? I hesitated, then decided to go for broke. We tell Victoria to go to hell if she tries to interfere with us. Alexander laughed, the sound echoing off the museum walls. That might be my favorite rule yet. Good, because I have a feeling we're going to need it. We stood there for another moment, processing the magnitude of what we'd just decided. Our fake relationship had just become very, very real, with all the complications that entailed. We should get back, Alexander said eventually. People will notice we're gone. Let them notice. I'm tired of caring what people think. Even Marcus? Even your boss? The question sobered me up quickly. David was going to have questions about tonight, especially after Marcus reported back about my boyfriend. questions I wasn't sure how to answer without revealing more than I could afford to share. "I'll handle my people," I said with more confidence than I felt. "You worry about yours." "Deal." Alexander offered me his arm. "Ready to go back and pretend to be a normal couple at a charity gala?" "How hard can it be? We've been pretending all week." As we walked back toward the gala, past pterodactyls and ancient mammals, I realized we weren't pretending anymore. We were just two people who had stumbled into something real and complicated and potentially wonderful, surrounded by the bones of creatures that had failed to adapt to changing circumstances. I could only hope we'd evolve faster than the dinosaurs had. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a natural disaster. I'd barely made it to my desk with my usual coffee when Marcus materialized beside my cubicle like a corporate ghost, his expression somewhere between concerned colleague and federal investigator. "Conference room. Now." His voice had the kind of gravity usually reserved for announcing layoffs or hostile takeovers. I followed him down the hallway, my stomach churning with every step. The green tech offices were typical startup chic: exposed brick, standing desks, and motivational posters about saving the planet that suddenly felt deeply ironic given my current situation. David Chen was already waiting in the glass-walled conference room, his salt and pepper hair slightly disheveled, in the way that meant he'd been running his hands through it. Not a good sign. Our CEO was normally composed to the point of zen-like calm, the kind of leader who'd built a company on the principle that environmental activism and business success could coexist. Seeing him agitated was like watching a nature documentary narrator lose his shit on camera. "Sarah, sit down." David gestured to the chair across from him, and I noticed he'd printed out what looked like several articles. "Marcus tells me you were at the Natural History Gala Friday night." "Yes, I was." I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's not against company policy to attend environmental events. Of course not. But it is worth discussing when you attend them as Alexander Blackstone's date." The words hung in the air like toxic waste. I could feel my career flashing before my eyes. 3 years of hard work and genuine passion for Green Tech's mission about to be flushed down the drain because I'd fallen for the wrong billionaire. "David, I can explain." "I hope you can, because I've spent the weekend trying to understand how one of my most promising analysts ended up romantically involved with the CEO of the company that's been systematically trying to acquire and destroy everything we've built." He slid one of the printed articles across the table. It was from page 6, complete with a photo of Alexander and me under the blue whale at the museum. The headline read, "Blackstone, air dates environmental activist. Love or corporate espionage?" My blood turned to ice. Someone had photographed us during our private moment when we'd thought we were alone. The image captured us mid-conversation, looking intense and intimate, with Alexander's hand on my face in what was clearly a romantic gesture rather than a business transaction. "Jesus," I whispered. "It gets worse," Marcus said, sliding over another printout. This one was from a business blog with better sources and less charity. Inside sources report, Blackstone Green Tech romance may signal acquisition attempt. The third article was the worst. From a tech industry newsletter that specialized in mergers and acquisitions. Analysis, Blackstone's romantic gambit could provide inside track to Green Tech's proprietary technologies. I stared at the articles, feeling like I was watching my life implode in real time. Someone, probably Victoria, though they couldn't prove it, had fed the story to the press, complete with enough insider details to make it sound like legitimate corporate intrigue rather than tabloid gossip. "Sarah," David's voice was gentler now, more disappointed than angry. "I need you to tell me the truth, all of it. Because right now, it looks like either you're feeding information to our biggest competitor or you're being played by someone who's very good at corporate manipulation." The irony was crushing. A week ago, I might have actually been guilty of corporate espionage. Now, when my feelings for Alexander were completely genuine, it looked more suspicious than ever. "It's not what it looks like," I said finally. "Then what is it?" I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how much truth I could safely share. "We met by accident at a charity event. He asked me out, I said yes. I didn't know who he was at first. Technically true, if you ignored the fake dating arrangement and the $5,000 and the psychotic ex-fiancé. And when you found out who he was? Marcus asked. I thought about ending it. But I struggled for words that wouldn't sound completely insane. He's not what I expected. He's not the corporate villain we thought he was. David leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity he used to analyze market trends and environmental impact reports. Sarah, you're a smart woman. You know how this looks. You're dating the CEO of our primary competitor right as we're in the middle of critical patent applications and funding rounds. I'm not sharing company information with him, I said firmly. I would never compromise GreenTech's interests. Intentionally or not. The question hit me like a slap. Because the truth was, I had been talking to Alexander about my work. Not specifics, not proprietary information, but enough that someone with his resources could probably piece together more than I'd intended to reveal. I'm not naive, David. I know how to separate my personal and professional lives. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been completely compromised. David pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. It was Alexander's Instagram, featuring a photo from our dinner at Nonna's with the caption, "Discovering Brooklyn through the eyes of someone special." I was visible in the background of the shot, laughing at something Nonna had said. It was candid and warm and absolutely damning in the current context. He posted this Saturday morning, David continued. 12 hours later, we got a call from Morrison Industries asking about our carbon sequestration patents. Morrison Industries, which happens to be one of Blackstone's subsidiary companies. My heart stopped. You think Alexander told them to? I think timing is everything in this business, and the timing here is suspicious as hell. I stared at the photo, remembering that moment at Nonna's when Alexander had snapped it. I'd been completely natural, unguarded, genuinely happy. Now it looked like evidence of my professional downfall. David, please. You know me. You know I care about this company's mission. I would never— I know you care, David said. That's what makes this so complicated. If you were a corporate spy, this would be simple. I'd fire you and call our lawyers. But you're not a spy. You're a dedicated employee who's gotten emotionally involved with someone who could destroy everything we've worked for. The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of my colleagues going about their normal Monday morning routines, blissfully unaware that my world was collapsing. What happens now? I asked quietly. David and Marcus exchanged a look that didn't bode well for my employment prospects. Now, we need to decide whether you're an asset or a liability, David said. And unfortunately, as long as you're romantically involved with Alexander Blackstone, you're definitely a liability. You're asking me to choose between my job and my personal life. I'm asking you to choose between your personal life and the jobs of everyone else who works here, David corrected. We have 43 employees, Sarah. People with families, mortgages, student loans. If Blackstone succeeds in acquiring us, most of them will be out of work within 6 months. The guilt hit me like a physical weight. I looked around the conference room, thinking about Jenny from accounting who was saving for her daughter's college tuition, or Miguel in R&D who just bought his first house, people who trusted GreenTech's leadership to protect their livelihoods. I need time to think, I said. You have until Wednesday, David replied. Either you end things with Blackstone, or we'll have to consider other options. Other options meaning termination. Other options meaning we do whatever we have to do to protect this company. I nodded, standing on unsteady legs. I understand. As I reached the door, David called my name. Sarah? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You're a good employee and a good person. I hope you find a way to do the right thing. The right thing, as if there was a clear moral path through this disaster. I made it back to my desk somehow, my mind spinning with implications and impossible choices. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Good morning, beautiful. Dinner tonight? I have something I want to discuss with you. Before I could respond, another text appeared, this one from an unknown number. Interesting articles this morning. I do hope you're prepared for what comes next. V. Victoria. Of course she was behind the media leak. She'd probably been planning this since the moment she saw us at the plaza, gathering information and waiting for the perfect moment to detonate the bomb. My phone rang, startling me. Alexander's name flashed on the screen. "Hello?" I answered, aware that half my co-workers were probably watching my every move now. "Sarah, have you seen the news?" Alexander's voice was tense, professional. "We need to talk." "I've seen it. And yes, we definitely need to talk." "My office, 1 hour. Can you make it?" I glanced around the Green Tech office, at my colleagues who were trying not to stare but clearly speculating about my phone call. In a few hours, they'd probably all know about the ultimatum David had given me. "I'll be there." The Blackstone Enterprises building was everything Green Tech wasn't. Sleek, imposing, radiating the kind of power that came from decades of successful capitalism. The lobby alone probably cost more than our entire office lease, all marble and steel and abstract art that whispered, "We have more money than your company will ever see." Alexander's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, who looked like she could run a small country, escorted me to the 42nd floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending to another planet, one where environmental consciousness was a marketing strategy rather than a core belief. Alexander's office was a study in understated luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Central Park, furniture that probably had its own insurance policy, and enough square footage to house a small startup. But what caught my attention were the personal touches, framed photos of coral reefs, a collection of marine biology textbooks, and a small terrarium that looked lovingly maintained. "Sarah." Alexander stood from behind his desk, and I could see the stress in his posture. He looked like he'd been dealing with his own crisis management all morning. "Thank you for coming. Have you seen all the articles?" I asked without preamble. "All of them, plus 3 more that published since this morning, and a voicemail from my company's board of directors requesting an urgent meeting to discuss my recent romantic entanglements." I winced. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Neither did I. But we're here now, and we need to figure out how to handle it." Alexander moved to the sitting area by the windows, gesturing for me to join him on the leather sofa that probably cost more than my car. "Tell me about your morning." I filled him in on David's ultimatum, the suspicious timing of Morrison Industries' call, and the impossible choice I'd been given. Alexander listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Victoria," he said when I finished. "This has her fingerprints all over it. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. She must have been planning this since the museum. Longer than that. I'm betting she started gathering information the night we met at the plaza." Alexander ran his hands through his hair, the perfectly styled look giving way to something more human and frustrated. "I should have seen this coming. Could you have stopped it? Maybe, if I'd been thinking clearly instead of—" He trailed off, looking at me with an expression that made my heart skip. "Instead of falling for you." The admission hung between us, beautiful and terrible in its timing. "Alexander, we need to talk about Morrison Industries." "What about them?" "They called Green Tech asking about our carbon sequestration patents, the day after you posted that photo of us at dinner." Alexander went very still. "You think I told them to call?" "I think the timing looks suspicious as hell, and my boss thinks I might be feeding you information whether I realize it or not." "Are you?" The question was quiet but loaded with implications. I thought about our conversations over the past week, my casual mentions of projects I was working on, his seemingly innocent questions about renewable energy trends, the way he'd remembered details about Green Tech's vertical farming initiative. I don't think so. But now I'm second-guessing every conversation we've had. Alexander stood and walked to his desk, returning with a manila folder that he handed to me with obvious reluctance. "What is this?" "Morrison Industries' acquisition strategy for the next fiscal year. Every company they're planning to target, every patent they want to acquire. I opened the folder, scanning the first page. GreenTech was listed third, under a section labeled Priority Acquisitions, Environmental Sector. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Because you need to understand something. Morrison Industries doesn't take orders from me. They don't take orders from Blackstone Enterprises. They're a completely independent subsidiary that operates under their own strategic plan." I flipped through more pages, seeing the detailed analysis of GreenTech's patent portfolio, market position, and potential acquisition value. It was thorough, professional, and completely terrifying. "This is from before we met," I realized, checking the dates on the documents. 3 months before we met. Morrison has been planning to approach GreenTech since January. Their call on Saturday had nothing to do with our relationship and everything to do with quarterly acquisition targets. Relief and horror warred in my chest. Relief that Alexander hadn't betrayed my trust. Horror that GreenTech was already in Blackstone's crosshairs regardless of our personal situation. "So our relationship isn't corporate espionage," I said slowly. "It's just terrible timing. The worst possible timing." I closed the folder, feeling like I'd just been handed classified documents that could either save my job or destroy what was left of my credibility. "Why are you showing me this? Isn't this confidential information?" "Probably. But you deserve to know the truth." Alexander sat back down beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens between us personally, I would never use our relationship to harm your company. The business side of things, that's separate. It has to be. Can it be? Can we really keep our personal and professional lives separate when our companies are literally at war? I don't know. But I want to try." I looked at him, this impossibly complicated man who just violated his own company's confidentiality to prove his trustworthiness to me. A man who was facing his own professional crisis because he'd chosen to make our relationship public. "Alexander, David gave me until Wednesday to choose. It's either you or my job." "And what are you going to choose?" The question I'd been dreading all morning. Because the rational choice was obvious. I needed my job, I believed in GreenTech's mission, and I couldn't sacrifice my colleagues' livelihoods for a relationship that was still too new to trust completely. But looking at Alexander, remembering the way he'd kissed me under the blue whale, thinking about his grandmother and his abandoned dreams of marine biology and the coral reefs he funded in her memory, the rational choice felt like emotional suicide. "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know." Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "I need to take this. It's my board chair." "Of course. I should probably get back to work anyway." "Sarah, wait." Alexander caught my hand as I stood. "Whatever you decide, whatever happens with our jobs and our companies, I want you to know that this, us, it's the most real thing I've felt in years. Alexander, I know it's complicated. I know the timing is terrible. But I'm not giving up on this without a fight." His phone continued ringing insistently. "Take your call," I said softly. "We'll figure this out. Promise me we'll figure this out. I promise we'll try." I left him in his office overlooking Central Park, probably about to have his own career-defining conversation with people who had the power to make his professional life very difficult. As the elevator descended back to street level, I thought about the folder he'd shown me, the proof that our relationship hadn't compromised GreenTech's security, but also the confirmation that we were caught in a corporate war that had been brewing long before we'd ever met. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Tick-tock, darling. The clock is running out for both of you. V." Victoria was still out there, still playing games with our lives. But for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like Alexander and I might actually be on the same side. Now I just had to figure out if that was enough to save both our careers and our chance at something real.